Hello and welcome to today's fireside chat on tracking Azure Hybrid Benefit. My name is Carl O'Doherty. I'm a principal Microsoft licensing consultant here at Version 1. I'm joined on today's fireside chat by my colleague Niamh Nusullivan, who is also a principal Microsoft licensing consultant here at Version 1. How are you doing today, Niamh?
I'm good, Carl. How are you?
Good, yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So we're here today to talk more Azure Hybrid Benefit. This time we're looking at the concept of tracking Azure Hybrid Benefit. So for those who aren't aware, we've recorded I think a fireside chat on each one of these. So if you haven't checked those videos out or checked out our blogs on those particular topics, check them out. But just to recap, Azure Hybrid Benefit, it comes in three flavors, probably the best way of describing it. Flavor number one is Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server. Second one is Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL Server. And then we've also got Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux. I think from the work we've done, we estimate that the cost saving associated with Azure Hybrid Benefit, particularly for Windows Server and SQL Server, ranges from between 15 to 40%. That excludes the cost of software assurance, so you'll also need to factor that into your TCO workings. In effect, what it does, for those who don't know, it removes the rental fees in Azure for Windows Server and SQL Server. However, that comes with some health warnings and that you still have the compute costs. Service fees also are included, things like storage and backup, so they'll still apply. So it's not a complete free lunch. Um, in the case of Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, in effect, if you've got subscription licenses for Red Hat or SUSE, what the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux does is it allows you to bring those licenses to Azure. And by doing so, you in effect remove the license included costs associated with those operating systems if you're using them. So, Niamh, this concept of Azure Hybrid Benefit, it's not a new one now at this stage. It's been around for a few years, but you know, I think a lot of organizations fail to realize the importance of tracking it. So what's your take on that? Why is it important to track Azure Hybrid Benefit for many organizations?
Well, now, I suppose the two main reasons why you should be kind of tracking and managing your Azure hybrid benefit. I mean, the first one is a no-brainer being kind of compliance. I mean, Microsoft aren't active in this space, but from the point of view of you need to know like how many licenses do you own, what type of licenses they are, and can you bring them to kind of Azure. Second of all, cost optimization. If you are using Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows SQL Server, like what resources have you used them against? Are you getting the maximum benefit for the licenses that you own against the resources you've assigned them to? So things like obviously making sure that you've got Azure Hybrid Benefit against nearly or always on kind of high utilization kind of resources from an Azure point of view.
Yeah, so they're two good, very valid points, right? So the first one I'm always banging on about this is that, it's a trust-based model. So as you've said, compliance is key here, and you need to, and that's why we're here today to talk about tips on how to track Azure Hybrid Benefit. But I think, the optimization one is equally as important. And I think what I'm seeing with a lot of organizations out there is that in many cases, the application of Azure Hybrid Benefit is not being proactively tracked. We see some organizations might do it on an annualized basis, and where they link the tracking or link some sort of a validation or verification of how it's being applied to the anniversary of an agreement or a particular billing cycle or conducting their annual budgets. And so I think, it's really important that you look at tracking this benefit or the usage of Azure Hybrid Benefit at least on a quarterly basis. So many organizations will track this monthly. And if you don't, I suppose the risk is that you're letting the risk of non-compliance or non-compliance risk accumulate over a 12-month or maybe more
Possibly longer,
of a
yeah.
duration. Or, what I'm also seeing is that on the cost saving side of things, it's great. You can stand up and you can tell a great story about how you can apply Azure Hybrid Benefit and it's going to save you X, Y, and Z over the next year or 3 years. But it's an awful pity when you have to give that feedback to an organization and they've been sitting on that benefit for the last, year, 2, 3 years, maybe longer. So that's what's really important, that, the frequency of tracking this is essential. And, I guess I often say this isn't a one and done exercise. It's something that needs to be continually monitored so that you're managing out the risk and you're optimizing the cost on an ongoing basis. Um, so like tracking the benefit, which is the core reason we're here today. What's your what's your take on that, Neve? If you're putting your licensed consultant hat on, like, we look at tracking
Yeah.
benefit in a couple of different ways, but like from a licensing perspective, what insights can you perhaps give some of the viewers today
Well,
on
definitely
that
from
front?
from the point of view of SQL, it's important to know kind of what licenses you have, and what licenses can you use for Azure Hybrid Benefit. Like, it's key to point out that it's core license, SQL core licenses only, and not server side licenses. Making sure that whoever's kind of managing the assignment of that understands, that from an entitlement point of view, what they can use, and what they can't. And I guess, understanding that there's no kind of dual use rights for kind of SQL Server core licenses. They've either got to be in Azure or you're using them on-prem. Um,
Yeah,
and then that you have enough licenses that you're going to use against kind of Azure resources, if you can do so. Um, so that would be from the license side. Then I suppose the next bit then is kind of looking at, well, how do you kind of track this?
yeah. So yeah, and there's ways and means of automating this, and I suppose automation is key, right? So that, when you understand the root cause of maybe some of the imbalances that you have in play, being able to look at ways to automate that, through some of the native capabilities within the Azure portal, as well as, some organizations will have invested in software asset management tools, that can help you track and manage some of this risk and optimization on an ongoing basis. But to come back to your points, as you said, I think, yeah, first starting point is, understanding what the licensing posture is, making sure that, what you're lighting up from an Azure Hybrid Benefits perspective, that you're entitled to do so. And I think that's, there can be a disconnect there between organizations failing to realize what they're actually entitled to use versus what they're actually using. So it's really important
Yeah.
that, your Azure team is working in tandem with your software asset management team to make sure that you're not falling outside of Microsoft's licensing terms. But I suppose a couple of quick tips in terms of how to identify where Azure Hybrid Benefit is being utilized within your estate today. So if we're looking at Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server or for Linux, pretty straightforward way of viewing this. If you just go to the Azure portal, look at the virtual machine view or the virtual machine scale sets view, there's a column in there that can be added in called OS licensing benefit. So quite quickly, by just adding that column in, you can start to view at a glance where the Azure Hybrid Benefit has been applied within your estate. Now, there's ways and means to perhaps automate the calculation as to if that benefit is being applied within compliance, but in many cases, organizations will possibly be exporting that into an Excel template and looking at the licensing position to try and understand what I have licensed versus what have I got assigned. That also, understanding the machine profiles that you're assigning the benefit to and where the benefit has been assigned or not been assigned, and understanding how the entitlement stacks up against what it is you're doing right now. That lays the foundation for you to kind of come back to your earlier point around trying to identify where there's an optimization opportunity by being able to pull and drag the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server or Linux in a more effective way. So that's, kind of a real quick and easy way of tracking SQL Server, sorry, for Windows Server Azure Hybrid Benefit and Linux Hybrid Benefit. Um, Looking at SQL, by simply looking at the Azure SQL view within the Azure portal, again, there's a column in there that you can add in quite quickly. It's called license type. And by applying that column in there, you'll start to view where Azure Hybrid Benefit has been allocated, or where perhaps you're using pay-as-you-go licensing models or license included licensing for SQL Server. That Azure SQL view will give you an understanding of where Azure Hybrid Benefit has been applied to SQL Server VMs, to SQL databases and SQL managed instance resources. It won't give you a view of where you're assigning Azure Hybrid Benefit for, say, data factory instances, or where SQL Server is running on Linux. So in that scenario, you're probably going to need to look at having some form of custom scripting type approach to capture the data, or depending on the type of software asset management tools or discovery tools that you're using, they may have some native capability in there to track that benefit if there's integration with Azure. So I think, at a glance, there are two quick and easy ways to capture where Azure Hybrid Benefit is being utilized within your estate, so that you can start to track the benefit. I don't know, from your side, Neve, any other insights to add on that from an automation point of view? I know you look at SQL extensively. Is there any other tips on SQL Server that you might want to throw into the
Well,
mix?
one thing that I thought was interesting is how Microsoft have kind of brought out a new feature now where instead of having to apply like Azure Hybrid Benefit at the individual kind of resource level, they've now brought out what they call
Yeah,
the centrally managed Azure Hybrid Benefit, and what that means is that customers can go in and um, enable Azure Hybrid Benefit at an account or at a billing level. So you can basically take a pool, set up kind of a pool of your licenses that you have entitlement for, be it subscriptions or perpetual kind of active software assurance licenses, and apply those to specific resources, or subscriptions or whatever. So that was quite kind of interesting. And I think it would be good to know as well, like, again, like the individual resource provisioning of Azure Hybrid Benefit, are there any kind of like license verification, or is it the same kind of a trust-based system? um or could you just go in and say, I've got like 1,000, not that you'd be recommending that, to go in and say you've
yeah,
got 1,000 SQL Enterprise cores. But it is interesting that they're kind of allowing customers to do that, and I guess, look, it's all towards encouraging customers to use their entitlements against Azure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And look, as we're always saying, yeah, that's where the importance of having a software asset management team or licensing specialist dovetailing the work of your Azure team to make sure that they're not falling outside of those rules. Because although we talk about cloud and there's a perception that perhaps cloud equals license compliance, that's not necessarily always the case. And so that's where I think it's really important that you do have that licensing expertise integrated with your technical folks, to make sure that you're not falling outside of those terms. But I think there's another couple of things that popped into my head just in terms of the governance as well, is and trying to track and manage the benefit to a certain degree. But looking at the usage of Azure Resource Graph can be a great way of creating just a standard set of queries that will allow you to track the benefit, and a host of other metrics that will allow you to make sure that you're optimizing the benefit on an ongoing basis. Cost management is also another great
Yeah.
tool within Azure that allow you to track AHB allocation. Um, Another really good one, I think, once you've kind of gone in and figured out what your allocation of Azure Hybrid Benefit looks like, and if you've found shortcomings in terms of perhaps being outside of the entitlement rights that you have, or being non-compliant, but also if you've identified where you're possibly not optimizing the entitlement to the best of your ability. One other great way of making sure that you're keeping track or keeping notified of how the benefit is being applied is using Azure monitoring alerts. So they can be set up to trigger like notifications if AHB has gone beyond a certain level. And then, as I said, some software asset management tools out there in the marketplace are evolving to start to help you capture some of these new metrics that we wouldn't have captured in the on-premise world. So have a look at the SAM tool set that you're currently using, and some of those features might already be there, and if they're not there, probably worth pressing on the vendor that you're working with to see how can they help you track Azure Hybrid Benefit on an ongoing basis. Plenty of
When
food
you
for
when
thought
you
there in today's section.
when you think about it, I mean, Microsoft are getting a lot more vocal about the ways that you can track, your Azure Hybrid Benefit. So in a way, they're kind of telling you that, you should be kind of like compliant in this stuff, as well as obviously, using it to maximum benefit.
So lots of really complicated stuff to talk about, right? That what as I said, with this particular benefit on paper, it seems fairly straightforward, but it can run wild, and having that licensing expertise is key, right? Not just at the implementation phase, but from an ongoing management perspective also. So if you do have any questions or queries off the back of today's session, do feel free to reach out to us. The Software Asset Management Practice version 1, we have extensive expertise in Microsoft licensing, as well as licensing across a whole broad range of other vendors. So if you've got any questions off today's fireside chat, do feel free to reach out to us. We'd be delighted to help break down some of the complexities of Microsoft licensing.